They say that we are all the products of our own upbringing. But how much of that can be used as blame when looking at the sick and twisted actions of a killer? My name is Adrian, and welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime. Today we're heading back to, you guessed it, Japan, to look at the case of Tomohiro Kato, the man responsible for the Akihabara Massacre in 2008. This incident would eventually become known as another case that highlights Japan's growing concerns over violent Hikikomori. And just a quick heads up, but I post both solved and unsolved cases here on a weekly basis, so if true crime is your kind of thing, please consider subscribing to Coffeehouse Crime. So grab your favourite mug, serve up a hot coffee and sit back. This is the case of Tomohiro Kato. This video is proudly sponsored by NordVPN. Being a channel all about true crime, we are often reminded of the precautions that we must take to remain safe in the modern day world. And this notion continues in the virtual world too. With NordVPN, all of your internet data stays safe behind a wall of next generation encryption, meaning that you and your data are protected away from prying eyes. Not only will your internet traffic be hidden behind a VPN server, but you can also choose from over 5,400 servers across 59 countries, meaning that you get to enjoy the internet with no limits or borders. Personally speaking, this has allowed me to read up on true crime news articles locked behind a specific country, something that was crucial to get around in order to share international crime cases with you all. And now being able to watch my favourite American Netflix shows through an American VPN server is a huge benefit too. Join through nordvpn.com/coffeehousecrime and you'll get a 2-year plan at a huge discount, with an additional 4 months for free. If you are interested, that's nordvpn.com/coffeehousecrime, or click the link in the description below. And thank you NordVPN for supporting us content creators. Welcome back to Japan. If I had a penny for every time that I thought fondly of this country, I'd be pretty rich. Being one of the most popular destinations to travel to for a holiday, Japan has made its mark in the world for its culture, connection to nature, and of course, food. And fun fact, but did you know that you'll never have to walk more than 12 meters on average to find a vending machine in Tokyo? That means you'll never be more than a minute away from a snack, or, of course, coffee. But our case today takes us north of Japan's bustling capital to Aomori. Aomori, which is the capital city of Aomori Prefecture, is located on the northern coastline of Japan's main island, Honshu. Like most of Japan's northern regions, Aomori Prefecture is mostly reliant on primary sector industries such as farming, forestry, and fishing. But the city itself caters more towards manufacturing and services. The year is 1982, the month is September, and on the 28th day of that month, Tomohiro Kato was born. He and his younger brother Yuji both grew up in a comfortably sized home deep in the suburbs of Aomori. His mother and his father, who was a senior manager in a financial institution, wanted nothing but the best success from their children. In the early years of Tomohiro's childhood, this was very much the case. His grades were considered to be exceptional at elementary school, and he quickly rose the ranks to become one of the school's best athletes. And as a child, Tomohiro was known to be bright, cheery, and energetic. He did have a short temper, but he always tried his best with his studies. Similar success was found when he moved on to Sakuda Junior High School, located on the eastern wing of Aomori. While there, his grades remained admirable, and he would eventually become president of the tennis club in middle school too. But midway through his teenage years, pressure from his parents started to show. Tomohiro started to fall out with them on a regular basis, very rarely returning home in the evenings. Allegedly, throughout his younger years, both of his parents held tremendous pressure over him and his brother to perform well at school and excel in their studies. It wasn't only the general strictness that you'd expect from your parents either. Unfortunately, it was much worse. If one single word or character was wrong in his homework, then his mother would rip up the page and force him to redo it entirely. And allegedly, she was abusive in more than just that way. Japan's way of work-life culture is, to say the least, very skewed when compared to the rest of the world. While basic working hours for the typical salaryman are generally from 9 to 6, many workers tend to stay in the office until much later, often past 10 PM. It is not unusual to see workers racking up to over 80 hours of work per week. In fact, this is the entire reason why Japan's capsule hotels exist in the first place. So workers could get their sleep in the city between shifts and not have to worry about the commute back home. For many traditional families, that left the mother to look after the children. And for the Kato family, things were no different. On more than one occasion, if Tomohiro wasn't quick enough to eat his food, his mother would throw his dinner on the floor and force him to eat it off the carpet. And if he couldn't recite his multiplication tables fast enough, his mother would dunk his head into the bathtub, something that left the poor kid traumatized every time. In the year of 1997, when he was 15 years old, Tomohiro's fortune took another turn into the negative. He enrolled into Aomori High School, considered to be an elite school in Aomori Prefecture. And from a social perspective, for the first time in his life, he was unpopular with his classmates, often becoming the centre of attention for bullying and name-calling. Academically, he wasn't doing so well either. Out of a class of 360 students, his academic ranking plummeted to 300. And sadly, his reputation in Aomori High School seemed to linger too. One student in the same class as Tomohiro described him as, "He gave off the feeling of being all alone, and I heard that he used to walk around school with a knife." And that's when the arguments and strictness at home really became a problem. Neighbours in the nearby area recalled Tomohiro being forced by his parents to stand outside for hours in the middle of Japan's cold winter. Begrudgingly, Tomohiro worked through those 3 years in high school, but his grades failed to improve. One of his teachers described him by saying,
"He wasn't outstanding at all in his studies or extracurricular activities. He was really just a mediocre student."
And the final nail in the coffin to Tomohiro's education was struck early in the year 2000, when he failed his entrance exams to enroll into Hokkaido University. His mother had decided long ago that he would go to this university to become a professionally recognised engineer. And Tomohiro himself had dreams to become an automotive design engineer. But with this fresh result, that no longer looked likely, and his mother was sure to express her disappointment when she would find out. Tomohiro would try taking the same exams again the following year, but second time wasn't the charm. He still failed to make his way in to university. Slipping into his own world of depression, self-shame, and resentment, Tomohiro grew more angry at himself, his mother, and eventually society. In what was felt to be a previous lifetime, he used to be academically gifted, sporty, and well-liked. But that was no more. A slow shift in the family's dynamics also started to appear. Where his mother once overburdened him with pressure and at times anger, she now appeared to be almost entirely careless with her older son. The attention seemed to shift towards Tomohiro's younger brother, Yuji, and Tomohiro was left to deal with his own self-disappointment alone. He eventually enrolled into Nakanihon Automotive College, training up to become an automotive mechanic. Maybe if he couldn't become a design engineer, he could start from a slightly lower position in the garage. In April of 2005, Tomohiro finally picked up some work. It was in a truck factory in Saitama Prefecture, located in the area of Greater Tokyo. This was finally his chance to become independent and hopefully re-earn his mother's love. But Tokyo is expensive, not an easy place for a mechanic to afford rent, and gradually over time, his savings depleted rather than grew. All in the meanwhile, his parents didn't seem to care much either. The year of 2006 was a newfound low for Tomohiro. Deeply in debt, with no self-worth or any profound direction in life, and believing that his family had given up on him, Tomohiro was at the end of his rope. It was in the late hours of one spring night that he got into the driver's seat of his car, targeted a wall, and in an attempt to take his own life, rammed his vehicle into it. But Tomohiro lived to see another day. In fact, other than a mild concussion and several cosmetic injuries, he was pretty okay after the crash. And things soon after started to look better for him as well. By the end of summer, a company known as Kanto Motor Industry reached out to his agent to offer him a job. And just several weeks after the crash, Tomohiro was now working in Susanoo City at a slightly more comfortable rate of 200,000 yen a month. Tomohiro was known to be an honest worker. He didn't speak much to his colleagues, but he did have a good working attitude. It was for this reason that after his first year of work, his contract was renewed to keep him on for another 12 months. While at work, Tomohiro was seen to be quiet and composed. But outside of the garage, he was even more quiet, inward and barely sociable. In fact, he had no friends at all. All of his communication with the outside world at the time was through an online bulletin board. And here, for the most part, he would remain anonymous, complaining about society and his lack of companionship. His main hobby was to stay at home and watch anime. Nothing wrong with that, but it's all that he did with himself. He would draw for hours, rarely be seen outside of his apartment, and have very little to say outside anime. To the people who knew of Tomohiro outside of work, they would describe him as short-tempered, angry, and reclusive. And they were right. He would lose his cool very often. He was unhappy with his life. He had no direction, no purpose, no money, no partner, and no family that he felt comfortable in. And the messaging boards that he frequented seemed to often harass and bully Tomohiro online. Even in his area of respite, he couldn't escape stress or abuse. And things would get a lot worse in June 2008. With the recent news that Kanto Motor Industry was set to reduce its number of temporary workers from 200 to 50, Tomohiro was emotionally on a knife's edge about the whole situation. Not only did he rely on his job to keep himself afloat, but the one-bedroom apartment that he was renting was from his agency too. On the 5th of June, he arrived at work to find his uniform missing from his locker. Strange, this hasn't happened before. But then remembering the company's recent announcement on redundancies, all he could think of was that the reason his uniform was missing was because he'd been sacked. In a blind rage, Tomohiro had slammed his locker door shut, screaming at his colleagues, asking for his uniform. Those colleagues went to go find their boss, but by the time they returned, Tomohiro had disappeared. He never returned to work. Not later in the day, or the next. Instead, he wrote messages online. "I don't have a single friend, and I never will in the future. I'll be ignored because I'm ugly. If I had a girlfriend, I wouldn't have just left my job, or be addicted to my cell phone. A man with hope could never understand this. I am lower than trash, because at least the trash gets recycled." It seemed that the moment Tomohiro freaked out at work, something inside the man had finally snapped. Snapped in a way that was not healthy, normal, or justifiable. In the afternoon of June the 6th, Tomohiro decided to travel to a weapon protection store, where he purchased 6 daggers, leather gloves, and special batons, all for 35,000 yen. And the next day, in the morning of June the 7th, he then took the local Shinkansen to Akihabara in Tokyo, and sold his computer and other belongings. Akihabara, located in central Tokyo, is an interesting place. Originally known as the black market in Japan's post-war era, it has now evolved over the decades to become better known as Electric City, and is also known worldwide as the mecca of otakus. An otaku is a person who is obsessed with the world of anime, and is often depicted as a reclusive and lonely person, something that many would define Tomohiro as. Tying things together, following strong influence, Akihabara has become the modern-day centre for popular Japanese culture, and is a major shopping district for video games, anime, manga, maid cafes, and arcades. A paradise for many. But the reason that Tomohiro was here was, to great surprise, not for fun. Quite the contrary, actually. With the money that he had made from selling his computer and his personal possessions, he then hired out a rental truck, supposedly to move everything out of his home. But being in Akihabara, Tomohiro was over 100 miles away from his house, and neither did he share any previous plans of moving. In the early hours of the next morning, he posted several messages online. Rain is forecasted. Bad news. I'm used to playing the role of a good man. Everybody is so easily deceived. Am I incapable of having friends? The time has come, let's go. It seems I'll be battling against my headache. What dreadful rain. even though I prepared everything perfectly. Into Kanagawa and having a rest. Things are going well at the moment. Awful jam. Will I be in time? Reached Akihabara. It's the day of pedestrians' paradise, isn't it? Just minutes left now. Just 48 minutes after his last message, at 12:33 PM on the 8th of July, Tomohiro Kato drove to a crossing in Akihabara. And after ignoring a red light, he sped through it and barraged his 5-ton truck into a crowd, hitting 5 people along the way. It was a Sunday, meaning that Chiyodori was shut to traffic, making it a widespread walkway for pedestrians. Terrified bystanders gathered to care for the victims that were hit. Little to their knowledge, they assumed that this was a car accident. But sadly, there was more. Tomohiro then broke out of his truck before brandishing a knife and violently attacking anyone within his reach. He began to scream, randomly targeting people regardless of their age or status. And once he got cold feet, he fled the area, running down the nearby alley. A police officer who was on duty in the nearby area responded as soon as he heard the commotion, and while running towards the incident, he crossed paths with Tomohiro Kato. Drawing his baton and striking it over Tomohiro's head, the suspect did little to react, and so the officer drew his gun instead. This finally elicited a response. Tomohiro dropped his knife. And only 2 minutes since the attack had begun, Tomohiro was held down by the officer and other pedestrians, and arrested by police. Over 17 ambulances rushed to the scene. But with great sadness, 5 of those victims who were at the mercy of Tomohiro Kato went into cardiac arrest at the scene. It was initially reported that 2 people had died from the attack, but during that same day, the death toll would increase to 7. And it was later determined that through autopsy reports, 3 victims died as a result of being hit by the truck, while the other 4 were fatally stabbed. Being caught in the act with literally hundreds of cameras all around him, Tomohiro admitted his guilt pretty much from the very beginning. He was also very open with his motives, and there were 3. The first motive was his own hatred towards himself and his fortune. Once a popular and well-educated child, his luck seemed to run out around high school. He felt like a failure, with a life that was destined for nothing great. And while he did share that his mother was abusive and rarely gave the love or acceptance that he wanted, he refused to blame her for his actions. The tipping point for his first motive was for believing that he had lost his job at Kanto Motor Industry. He would be out of work, with no house or no money. However, the company would later reveal that he never did lose his job. He just assumed incorrectly. The next motive for his actions was due to his lack of companionship. He felt cold, ugly, lonely, isolated in his world. And according to him, if he had a girlfriend, none of this would have ever happened. And finally, motive number 3, he felt resentful of his experience on the social messaging board. Slowly over time, he had been beaten down by anonymous users. And with the harassment, his hatred grew into something he could no longer cope with, something that had to be served back. In short recap, when questioned by police officers, he said he did it to vent his pent-up rage and anger, and demonstrate his revenge to all those that did him wrong in the past. He wanted to teach other users of his internet forum that there must be consequence to their actions. Putting it blunt, he killed innocent people just to prove a point to those that made fun of him. Tomohiro Kato's case made global headlines, and it sent shockwaves across the nation of Japan, a country that was once traditionally considered as a society safe from violent crime. And there were economic consequences to this case too. The Tokyo Metropolitan Public Safety Commission announced that the 35-year-old practice of closing traffic on Chiyodori on Sundays and holidays was to be officially suspended until safety measures were reviewed. And games developer Konami also cancelled 3 upcoming launch events in Tokyo, with the safety of its fans in mind. The media had their say on the matter too. labelling Tomohiro's attack as just one of several other events that signalled a growing epidemic of kireru, an act of rage that is committed by fringe youth and otakus as the answer to their antisocial behaviour. And following the discovery of Tomohiro's messages, people saw his actions and hate as another case committed by a Hikikomori, a person who experiences total withdrawal from society and suffers extreme isolation and confinement. Some of those messages revealed his plans to use a vehicle and then to use a knife to continue the attack on foot. He wanted to maximise casualty, and so he waited for Chiodori to close at noon to traffic before commencing the attack. Following his grievous actions, Tomohiro's parents officially released an apology to his victims. They did this live on television while being interviewed by a popular show in Japan. And very soon after, his father, who was in a senior position at a bank, was forced to retire early. The pressure that he received from his colleagues was just too much to handle. And shortly after, threatening and harassing calls were made to their home back in Aomori, eventually forcing the two to cut their own telephone line. Although Tomohiro himself was cooperative during his inquiry, to the shock and disgust of many, he remained entirely unapologetic. Despite this, he did admit that he posted the messages ahead of the crime in hopes that police would notice and stop him. Leading up to his trial, defense lawyers argued that Tomohiro had, quote, mental impairments which prevented him from understanding the true scale of his actions. However, along with Tomohiro's own admission, health officials who conducted a review of his mental state at the time of his crimes found that he was fully aware and accountable for his own actions. Prosecutors accused him of following the devil's deeds, and in conclusion, on the 24th of March 2011, Tomohiro Kato was officially found guilty on 7 counts of murder. And as a result, he was sentenced to death by Tokyo's High Court. He still remains behind bars, awaiting his sentence. Tomohiro's actions had a profound impact, not just to his victims, but to those around him in his former years too. In February of 2014, just 6 years short of the Akihabara Massacre, his younger brother, Yuji Kato, ended his own life. Yuji, who didn't deal well with the aftermath, very quickly slipped into depression and left his job. Instead of his once happy day-to-day life, he then found himself in the headlights of media. And while coverage of his brother's case decreased over time, it never really ended, and he never stopped feeling guilt and remorse for his brother's actions. Between the years of 2008 and 2013, he took up several new jobs. But as soon as he was found out to be Kato's younger brother, he felt that he was looked at differently. In a memoir that he left behind, Yuji said, "My brother shared that he was a copy of his mother. And according to that law, if my brother is copy number 1, I am copy number 2. And I see that. I see that same part of my brother in myself." Things would eventually fall apart for Tomohiro's parents too. His mother, who ended up divorcing his father, was eventually admitted to a mental hospital. She's still there to this day and hasn't quite been the same ever since. And his father, who is the last of the family to be in day-to-day society, still lives in the same home. But he is seldom seen, and when he is, he refuses to talk or express his opinion. He simply bows in silence. And at night, lights are never on in the Kato household. Instead, small flames can be seen through the window, the man living in quietness and candlelight. From the very minutes commencing 12:33 PM on June 8, 2008, the lives of 7 families and hundreds of friends changed forever. Katsuhiko Nakamura was a 74-year-old dentist who was having lunch with his wife and son, when his life was abruptly ended. And Mayumoto, a 21-year-old student at Tokyo University studying arts, was Tomohiro's only female victim. She was on her way to a part-time job when she met her end. And while not much can be found about the other 5 victims, Fujino Kazuran, Kawaguchi Takahiro, Koiwa Kazuhiro, Miyamoto Naoki, and Matsui Mitsubishi all perished at the hands of Tomohiro Kato, leaving a void in the hearts of many. All round, this is a very sad case to talk about. And to add to the sadness, It's the inherent fear that we all feel when we realise that this attack was random. Just 7 people going on about their day with no warning or premonition. Something that couldn't be avoided, all by the hands of a twisted individual. Thank you for watching another video today by Coffeehouse Crime. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to be here. If you found this video interesting, or if you learned something new today, then please remember to like the video and subscribe to Coffeehouse Crime if you haven't yet. So what do you think about Tomohiro's case? Sure, he was a monster, but do you think it was his family and his lifestyle that were strong factors to this? Please go ahead and let me know what you think in the comments below. Thank you again for watching today, folks, and as always, I'll be right here behind this camera waiting for you in the next one. Until that moment arrives, so look after each other. Goodbye.